Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about? Matrix. Do you want to know what it is? What it is?
It's instructive to go to a professional professor's meeting. In my field, which is philosophy, you go to a congress of philosophers, and you'll find when they all get together in the bar or in the restaurant in somebody's room, the one thing they don't talk about is philosophy. It is very bad form indeed to show interest in philosophy among your colleagues. The same is exactly true in clergy gatherings. They don't talk about religion. What they both talk about is politics. Church politics and academic politics. Because it's bad form to be brilliant on a faculty. Because it outclasses your colleagues. Therefore, faculty people tend to cultivate the study of mediocrity. The study of mediocrity. Got to watch out for that. I mean, if you get mobs of students coming to your lectures, you get pretty black looks from your colleagues. But you see what it is? It's scholarship about scholarship, and not scholarship. Just as learning, because learning is good for you, is irrelevant to learning. The whole idea of improving yourself by learning is irrelevant to the learning process. And in the same way, doing business is doing business. Doing business, such as manufacturing clothes, is a very good thing to do. I could conceive that it would be extremely enjoyable, something one could be very proud of, to make good clothes. Of course you need to sell them because you need to eat. But to make clothes to make money raises another question. Because then your interest is not in making clothes, it's in making money, and then you're going to cheat on the clothes. And then you get an awful lot of money and you don't know what to do with it. The study of mediocrity.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neil. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind, for your mind, for your mind, for your mind, for your mind.
Given the triumphant academic setting here, an obvious question is how much of this work of adjusting our default setting involves actual knowledge or intellect. This question gets very tricky. Probably the most dangerous thing about an academic education, at least in my own case, is that it enables my tendency to over-intellectualize stuff. To get lost in abstract arguments inside my head instead of simply paying attention to what's going on right in front of me. Paying attention to what is going on inside me. As I'm sure you guys know by now, it is extremely difficult to stay alert and attentive instead of getting hypnotized by the constant monologue inside your own head. Maybe happening right now. 20 years after my own graduation, I have come gradually to understand that the liberal arts cliche about teaching you how to think is actually shorthand for a much deeper, more serious idea. Learning how to think really means learning how to exercise some control over how and what you think. It means being conscious and aware enough to choose what you pay attention to and to choose how you construct meaning from experience. Learning how to think. Learning how to think. Learning how to think. Learning how to think. Because if you cannot exercise this kind of choice in adult life, you will be totally hosed. Think of the old cliche about, quote, the mind being an excellent servant but a terrible master. This, like many cliches, so lame and unexciting on the surface, actually expresses a great and terrible truth. It is not the least bit coincidental that adults who commit suicide with firearms almost always shoot themselves in the head. The head. They shoot the terrible master. And the truth is that most of these suicides are actually dead long before they pull the trigger. And I submit that this is what the real, no bullshit value of your liberal arts education is supposed to be about. How to keep from going through your comfortable, prosperous, respectable adult life dead. Unconscious. A slave to your head and to your natural default setting of being uniquely, completely, imperially alone. Day in and day out. That may sound like hyperbole or abstract nonsense. Let's get concrete. The plain fact is that you graduating seniors do not yet have any clue what day in, day out really means. Learning how to think. 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 Learning how to think.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
You know, one of the things that revolutionary movements have to offer young people is a sense of romantic adventure. I mean, if you're working at 7-Eleven in a dead-end job and you're offered an adventure the chance to demonstrate dramatically for a messianic cause, especially if you're young, that's going to call to something deep inside you and excite you, because everyone needs a higher purpose, and that longing can be addressed by romantically inclined ideologues, but there are better ways of addressing that longing, I believe, and there's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's a tremendous adventure in that. It's a demanding ethical striving, and it's a form of responsibility to pay attention to what you say and to only say things that you believe to be true. And there's insane adventure in that, because you have no idea what's going to happen if you do that. You entice people into adopting ethical responsibility by pointing out to them in story, and perhaps to the degree you're capable by example, that there isn't anything more interesting or meaningful that they could possibly do. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. And I think that's part of the reason that my books and lectures have proved popular. I'm making a case for some things, I suppose, that you might regard as obvious, at least when viewed from a certain perspective. When I was talking to large live audiences, I noted that one topic in particular would bring the audience to a dead silent halt constantly, and that was when I made a rhetorical case for the relationship between responsibility and meaning. And you need a meaning in life. You need a purpose to sustain you through the catastrophe of life, through the suffering of life. You need a meaning. It's not optional. And the deeper the meaning, the better. And it's definitely the case that people find that meaning primarily in the adoption of responsibility. And that case isn't being made well in our culture, especially not to young people. There's a hunger, a mass hunger for that idea. It's better than happiness, that meaning. It's deeper than happiness. Happiness is fleeting. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. There's tremendous adventure in doing something like telling the truth. The meaning that comes along with the adoption of heavy responsibility, that's sustaining through good times and bad. It's always the case that the best story wins.
Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Follow me.
In exploring the theme of the web of life, I have thus far discussed two principal topics. First, the web considered as selectivity, experience considered as what we pay attention to on the one hand and what we ignore on the other. And I showed how the way in which we pay attention to the world creates, isolates, that we call particular things, events, and persons, and they seem to be disconnected and to be alone because we ignore the connection between them. And I use the analogy of weaving, where the threads go underneath and join on the back in a way that is not seen on the front. So you might say in the unconscious, although I don't particularly like that word because it makes it seem as if it was something rather dead. But on the unconscious side of life, as on the back of the weaving or the back of the embroidery, there are connections which are not published. 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 Now, in the second part of the theme was the web as mutuality. When I discussed the way the existence of a web, the existence of cloth, or anything like that, depends on a mutual support of the warp and the woof. And this miraculous thing occurs that when the things support each other, being comes into being. Cloth comes into being. And so in exactly the same way, our world is a manifestation of relativity. And this requires a balance, combination, a relationship of opposites in every domain of life. And although these opposites are explicitly different and even antagonistic, they are implicitly one. Implicitly one. They are implicitly one. And that's the secret. There are connections which are not published. A relationship of opposites in every domain of life. There are connections which are not published. There are connections which are not published. A relationship of opposites in every domain of life. There are connections which are not published. They are implicitly one. And that's the secret. See, there are these two secrets that we went into. The connection between what are supposed to be separate things and events, and the mutual unity between what are manifestly, that is to say, openly, for purposes of publication, opposites. Now, I'm going to take two other aspects of the web. There are connections which are not published. A relationship of opposites in every domain of life. There are connections which are not published. There are connections which are not published. A relationship of opposites in every domain of life. There are connections which are not published. They are implicitly one. And that's the secret.
This isn't real. What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
So I'm going to tell you today about a way of looking at the world that I think is substantially different from the way that most people look at the world. The standard scientific view of the world, of course, is that it's made up of familiar objects, and that the world is, in essence, a material place. But there's some very potent limitations of that viewpoint, despite the fact that it's given us tremendous power. And the limitations are essentially as follows. The essential materialist view can't tell us anything about consciousness, which is probably the primary fact of experience. The essential materialist view can't tell us anything about consciousness, which is probably the primary fact of experience. Neuroscientists in recent years, mostly in the last decade, have been trying to crack the problem of consciousness consciousness, and they have absolutely made no progress. Not only do neuroscientists understand virtually nothing about consciousness, they can't even really figure out what its function is. They can't understand why our brains would go to so much effort to make us aware of things when it isn't clear at all that awareness is necessary for life, especially given that there are many life forms on the planet that don't seem to be aware at all. The essential materialist view can't tell us anything about consciousness, which is probably the primary fact of experience. The essential materialist view can't tell us anything about consciousness, which is probably the primary fact of experience. The standard materialist view is also insufficient in many other ways. It's insufficient philosophically, I think, as you probably all know, because a conception that portrays the world as made up of objects is in some really fundamental way dead. Right? It doesn't seem to have a place in it for human beings, or a place in it for meaning, or a mode whereby you might be able to conceptualize the real existence of something like an emotion, or a dream, or a motivation. All phenomena which are just as mysterious to neuroscientists and to scientists in general as consciousness. Now, the problem with this seems to be mostly experiential. If you have to ask people what they know more than anything else, they know, number one, that they're conscious. They know, number two, that their internal experiential life is composed of emotions and motivational states, which, although not rational in essential structure, are so real and relevant that virtually everything that people do is predicated on them. The essential materialist view can't tell us anything about consciousness, which is probably the primary fact of experience. The essential materialist view can't tell us anything about consciousness, which is probably the primary fact of experience. Viewpoint, despite its ability to give us tremendous technological power, seems to eradicate from formal consideration many essential experiences that are vital to life, in fact, even perhaps primary. I'm going to suggest to you today that there's an alternative viewpoint, and I think also it's one that, although you may be hearing about it formally for the first time, is also something that you know unbelievably deeply.
Unbelievably deeply. Unbelievably deeply. Unbelievably deeply.
The thing is that we have been educated to use our minds in a certain way, a way that ignores or screens out the fact that every one of us is an aperture through which the whole cosmos looks out. Every one of us is an aperture through which the whole cosmos looks out. You see, it's as if you had a light covered with a black ball, and in this ball were pinholes, and each pinhole is an aperture through which the light comes out. So in that way, every one of us is actually a pinhole through which the fundamental light, that is the existence itself, looks out. Only the game we're playing is not to know this. To be only that little hole, which we call me, my ego, my specific John Jones, or whatever. Every one of us is an aperture through which the whole cosmos looks out. Every one of us is an aperture through which the whole cosmos looks out. If we can maintain at the same time the sense of being this specific John Jones with his role in life, or whatever, and know also underneath this that we are the whole works, you get a very marvelous and agreeable arrangement. A most remarkable harmoniousness. I mean, it gives one's life a great sense of joy and exuberance if you can carry on these two things at once. If you, in other words, you know that all the serious predicaments of life are a game. Every one of us is an aperture through which the whole cosmos looks out. Every one of us is an aperture through which the whole cosmos looks out.
This is the world that you know. The world as it was at the end of the 20th century. You've been living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
See, ours is not the first by George good government to arise on the world stage. There have been several. Rome, Spain, and Greece, and China, and each enjoyed about 150 years at its zenith. That's just about our time in the New World. And then each decayed away. Not one of them was ever destroyed by anybody else's marching legions. Each rotted away morally, socially, culturally, economically, simultaneously. You know, one of the most cruel paradoxes of history is this. Because each was a good government, it bore bountiful fruit. And when it bore bountiful fruit, the people got fat. And when they got fat, they got lazy. When they got lazy, they began to want to absolve themselves of personal responsibility and turn over to government to do for them things which traditionally they had been doing for themselves. First, there appears to be nothing wrong asking government to perform some extra service for you, but if you ask government for extra services, government, in order to perform its increasing function, has to get bigger, right? And as government gets bigger, in order to support its increasing size, it has to what? Tax the individual more, so the individual gets littler. And to collect the increased taxes requires more tax collectors, so the government gets bigger. In order to pay the additional tax collectors, it has to tax the individual more, so the government gets bigger, the individual gets littler. And the government gets bigger, the individual gets littler. Until the government is all powerful, the individual is hardly anything at all. Good government bore bountiful fruit. And when it bore bountiful fruit, the people got fat. And when they got fat, they got lazy. When they got lazy, they began to want to absolve themselves of personal responsibility and turn over to government to do for them things which traditionally they had been doing for themselves. Some believe that the need is for a vigorous, strong man to arise on the scene, to regulate and regiment the affairs of men. Yet history tells us there have been several. favor the farmers, he gave them loans and subsidies. The national debt mounted alarmingly. Whenever anybody tried to tell him that governments, even as people, can go broke when they spend beyond their income, he said they just didn't understand deficit finance. What do you say? Did he build on rock or on sand? I say on sand. For you see, this was the story of Emperor Su-Tung-Po, who led China to its doom. More than 1,000 years ago. Because each was a good government, more bountiful fruit. When it bore bountiful fruit, the people got fat. And when they got fat, they got lazy. When they got lazy, they began to want to absolve themselves of personal responsibility and turn over to government to do for them things which traditionally they had been doing for themselves. Satisfied with all my heart that if Uncle Sam ever does get whipped, here too, it will have been an inside job. It was internal decay, it was not external attack that destroyed the Roman Empire. Starting about 146 BC, internal conditions in Rome were characterized by a welter of class wars and conflicts, street brawls, corrupt governors, lack of personal integrity and moral responsibility, street brawls, corrupt governors, lack of personal integrity and moral responsibility, street brawls, corrupt governors, lack of personal integrity and moral responsibility.
Akira.
The Don.
It's for the heroes.
You have to be the hero of your own story. And you can do that. You have to be the hero of your own story. And you can do that. 90% of it is just showing up. Get there and start working. Like, you're not gonna feel perfect every day. Gotta be those days you push through. This is what I want you to do. Write down what you would like to fix about your life. If you're 30 pounds overweight, you wanna lose 30 pounds? Do it the right way. Write down what you eat. Exercise every day. Force yourself to do it. The brain is the general, the troops are the body, and you get up and you do it. And then you get to write it down.
You know, you're doing what you gotta do to get by, but ultimately you're not respecting yourself. I think we all have a certain amount of appreciation and respect for hero figures. We all look at the guy who never lies, always does the right thing, and fucking helps everybody out, and that's the John Wayne character, you know, that's the ultimate hero. The ultimate hero. You have to be the hero of your own story. And you can do that. You have to be the hero of your own story. And you can do that. And when you look at your own life and you don't stack up, you're a thief, you stole money from your wife's purse, and you don't want to smoke cigarettes, but you fucking have to, you can't deal with the stress and smoke. You devalue yourself. You slowly start devaluing yourself. You look at yourself, you realize that if you were judging yourself, you would judge yourself unfair. You can't pretend you're the hero of your story. Hero of your story. Most people get stuck in these patterns, find themselves in the person who doesn't follow through on their ideas. When I start things, then I quit. No, you don't. No, you have started things and you quit, and it gives you a horrible sense of regret that's made you define yourself by that. You're not who you were a year ago. You're not who you were 5 years ago. You're not who you were last week. So you gotta regulate how much you dwell on regrets of the past. You really gotta be careful. You have to be the hero story. And you can do that. You have to be the hero of your own story. You can be the hero of your own story that woke up today. You can be the hero of your own story that at 40 years of age stopped, got out of bed and said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not doing this anymore. And I'm gonna get myself in shape and I'm gonna eat healthy. And I'm gonna do this because this is me now. This is me now. I decided this is me. And people have to realize that you are not your past. You are not all the times you fucked up. You're not all the times you were drunk. That's not you. That's not you. You are the person who's learned from a great deal of experience.
This is a battle that you will fight for the rest of your life. But the key is to fight it, not to give in. Don't give in to that resistance. Fight that resistance. And in doing so, every day you do so, you have won the battle for that day. And you will continue to fight that battle.
You have to be the hero of your own story. And you can do that. You have to be the hero of your own story. And you can do that. You have to be the hero of your own story. And you can do that. You have to be the hero of your own story. And you can do that.
Providing you benefits, providing you a healthy work environment. Why? Well, because they want people to work for them. They don't want people to realize their own dreams and escape. They want to set it up so that you stick around in some sort of an unsatisfying world. It's up to you to see that video game problem, to see that issue as it comes up on the map, and calculate your future.
What is the Matrix? Control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this.
To say what has never been said, to see what has never been seen, draw, paint, sing, sculpt, dance, and act what has never before been done, to push the envelope of creativity and language. And what's really important is, I call it the felt presence of direct experience, which is a fancy term which just simply means we have to stop consuming our culture. We have to stop consuming our culture. We have to create culture. Don't watch TV. Don't read magazines. Don't even listen to NPR. Create your own road show. The nexus of space and time, where you are now, is the most immediate sector of your universe. And if you're worrying about Michael Jackson or Bill Clinton or somebody else, then you are disempowered. You're giving it all away to icons which are maintained by an electronic media, so that you want to dress like X or have lips like Y. This is shit brain, this kind of thinking. That is all cultural diversion. And what is real is you and your friends and your associations, your highs, your orgasms, your hopes, your plans, your fears. And we're told, no, we're unimportant. We're peripheral. Get a degree, get a job, get a this, get a that, and then you're a player. You don't even want to play in that game. You want to reclaim your mind and get it out of the hands of the cultural engineers who want to turn you into a half-baked moron, consuming all this trash that's being manufactured out of the bones of a dying world. Where is that at? Where is that at? Where is that at? Catalyst to say what has never been said, to see what has never been seen, to draw, paint, sing, sculpt, dance, and act what has never before been done, to say what has never been said, to see what has never been seen, to draw, paint, sing, sculpt, dance, and act what has never before been done. What has never been said, to see what has never been seen, draw, paint, sing, sculpt, dance, and act what has never before been done, to say what has never been said, to see what has never been seen, draw, paint, sing, sculpt, dance, and act what has never before been done. Reclaim your mind.
Akira. He's got clout. He's got clout.
That's not quite the way we educate our youngsters. We have another idea for them. The traditional notion of a mature adult is a person who behaves as he ought to behave, who behaves as the society has always asked him to behave. Grandpa behaved this way, so did great-grandpa, and every kid who didn't was eaten. So we all behave this way. That is to say, the adult is the one who accepts and represents the order of the society without question. This you get in all traditional societies. Now you know what we call a person who behaves that way. A stuffed shirt. Shirt, a person who behaves as he ought to behave. He has never built anything particular out of himself. He has simply done as told. He's sure of what's right and what's wrong, and that's that. Now we can't have this anymore. We don't want it. Our notion in our society today of an adult mind is a mind that accepts responsibility for its own action, that judges in terms of values, not saying, oh, I want this because I like it, but in terms of an ordered, considered value scale. The individual is to judge, the individual is to criticize, and the individual is to represent with courage and loyalty his judgment. A stuffed shirt. A stuffed shirt. A person who behaves as he ought to behave. Now this asks a lot of the society itself that wasn't asked before. This also tends to shatter the idea of authority. Now that idea was formally validated by saying it came from God. The Lord of the universe ordered things this way. The society. The society.
He still needs a lot of work.
What are you doing?
Your muscles have atrophied. We're rebuilding them.
Why am my eyes so...
You've never used them before. Rest, Neil. The answers are coming.